Let me just begin with a couple of opening questions and then yield to my colleagues. First, as you said, Ambassador Reese, in your statement, in a CNN interview dated May 30th, an interview of Daniel Wani by Nina Elbager. This is Mr. Wani speaking in response to a question. Sadly, it's not the U.S. government. When the problem began, the U.S. consul here had a very negative position on this. She was very high-handed. She was very, very rude. She said, and I quote, "I don't have the time." If you could perhaps elaborate on this culture of denial that you mentioned earlier, because this has been a systemic problem that I and you, when you served as Chief of Staff for this committee, in Congress now 34 years, it is all over the world we encounter this. And I'll give you a few examples. Tony Perkins mentioned Saeed Abedini. Saeed Abedini's wife, Mahmeh, was originally told, "There's nothing we can do." Frank Wolf convened a hearing of the Lantos Commission and passionately called on the State Department and Secretary Kerry, and then they said, well, we'll raise it, and Secretary Kerry did issue a statement. When Mahmeh came here, she was still bewildered by the lack of engagement on the part of the U.S. government on behalf of this American being held by the Iranians as we hold nuclear talks. Human rights fell off the page, if you will. Chen Quanzhen, 4 hearings on this committee on Chen Quanzhen, and he was given back to the Chinese secret police under guard in a, quote, hospital where he could not leave, with a unbelievably porous assurance that Chen Quanzhen would be okay. That's what we were told. Thankfully, he testified by way of a phone call and said, I want to come to America, and 6 hours later, that permission was granted, and we had more press here than I've ever seen before, and that helped his case. The situation in Tbilisi, I had a couple of my constituents stuck in Abkhazia as well as in South Ossetia, so I went there. And I found out, to my shock and dismay, that the Consul General had said that, oh, this marriage, purported marriage, of an American who used to be a guard at the White House, so he had to be vetted quite effectively, and he was telling the truth, and this woman who was of Georgian origin was bogus. And therefore, the little child who was in Abkhazia could not make, she was stuck and literally was prostrated as Russian tanks went through her town, and obviously everybody was scared to death something might happen to her. And then finally, Jacob Ostreicher. We've had several hearings on Jacob. He's finally out of, because of a private extradition effort, or an effort to ferry him out of the country by way of an automobile. At first, we were told, and I was told this directly by the embassy and by top people at the State Department, that if he, at his request, I asked this question, if Jacob goes to the embassy, will he be welcomed? Because he felt his life was in dire jeopardy. He even had, for a while, Venezuelan guards, of all things, guarding him when he was in the hospital. They said, we will put him out the door. I made that phone call myself and heard that, and I said, are you kidding? An American? I mean, we're supposed to be the oasis. So, Mr. Ambassador, if you could speak to this culture perhaps a little bit more, because I think there needs to be a sea change of attitude, which, again, the IRFA bill, Religious Freedom Bill, was supposed to do about religious freedom. Part of that legislation had text in it about training Foreign Service officers to understand the importance and centrality of religious freedom, and that training has been very slight all these years. So if you could answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think there are at least 3 things going on. One of them I've already spoken to, which is that you do get fraudulent applications, you do get frivolous applications. We're not supposed to grant those applications. And perhaps there's a natural human tendency, when you've been snookered a couple of times, to assume that the snookering level is 99% instead of some lower number. And that's just an occupational hazard of these kinds of jobs. A second, but we've all seen people in customer service jobs, which is what this is, who frankly have outlived their usefulness on those jobs and ought to go find other jobs. And so I think we do need to try to inoculate people against that tendency to deny good cases simply because some cases are fraudulent. And that's particularly true where you're dealing with people who may well be American citizens. The second thing has to do with the institutional culture of the State Department itself, broader than just consular officers. The State Department is a foreign ministry. A foreign ministry's main job is to deal with the governments, with other foreign ministries, with governments of other countries. And these kinds of issues, these humanitarian issues, these human rights issues, these refugee issues, they complicate what many Foreign Service officers see as their main job, which is to improve the relationship between the United States and that other government. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're simplistic or one-dimensional. Everybody knows that we have to pay attention to those other issues, but I don't think that the natural reaction of somebody who has to go deal with the foreign ministry in the country that he's living in every day, when he hears about a Meriam Ibrahim case, he's not going to say, "Oh boy, a chance to strike a blow for human freedom." He might understand that's his duty, we hope he does, but it's not something that makes the State Department's life easier. The third thing with these high-profile cases where members of Congress get involved is, I've seen it from both sides. So I've worked in Congress, I worked in the State Department. The executive branch in general and the State Department in particular hate to be told what to do by Congress. And so there's this faux integrity that gets built up, that we're not going to be politically influenced. We're going to do what we would have done anyway. Now, I don't want to say that happens all the time, and I do have to say, as I said in my testimony, that there are many fine and decent and conscientious people in the State Department, that many of them do the right thing even if it hurts their career. But I do think that institutions have institutional cultures and that there are some of those tendencies that we need to fight.
Yeah, if you could answer that as well, but you mentioned, Dr. Jasser, about no CPCs, the fact that they have not been redesignated, and Robbie George, who was then the president or the chairman of USERF, and now Katrina Lantos Sweat has taken over that leadership as chairman. No CPC since 2011, which I think is a huge abrogation of duty on behalf of the administration. Hopefully, they'll do it soon and do it robustly, including all those countries that need to be so named. But I think if you could speak to whether or not that sends a message to countries that are committed egregious violations of religious freedom when we don't even do the designations anymore.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. And that really was the follow-up to Ambassador Reese's comments, is that we started a program on prisoners of conscience that various members have adopted, if you will, various prisoners across the spectrum in many different countries, because these cases, like Meriam Ibrahim, are emblematic of deeper problems, typically not only in Sudan, but in every one of these countries where prisoners of religious freedom, of conscience, of faith, belief that are imprisoned simply because of their belief are a sign typically of a more systematic, egregious, and ongoing violations of religious freedom and human rights related to that. So as a result, that's why you make the connection between these prisoners. And when we defend them, when our President, when our State Department, our embassies defend these prisoners and say that we want them released and freed, it then sends a message that our freedoms that we defend at home and our International Religious Freedom Act of '98 actually means something. And we've been concerned that at the Commission that there has been a stagnation and there's been no designations of CPC since 2011. The lists, while there's no disparity on Sudan, both the State Department and our Commission agrees that they're a CPC. They have not redesignated them since 2011, and we hope that when their report comes out, they follow that quickly with a designation, as we have recently in our report. So it's important that when these designations are made, it sends the message that we believe that there's egregious and ongoing violations, and as a result, it carries with it the sanctions that the law, the statute provides. And I think that's how we translate the plight of people like the brave and courageous people like Meriam Ibrahim, then get translated into a process and policy that means that then religious freedom becomes the centerpiece. And most studies have shown recently, repeatedly, that countries that honor these principles then become more successful economically and more secure and less threats of terrorism and regionally become better actors in the world. So this is why I think it's very important that this be highlighted, and they have not done so. And we hope their report's supposed to be coming out this week. I think it's been delayed again, and hopefully be followed by a redesignation of Sudan and other countries.
I have some additional questions for Tony Perkins and Mr. Ishmael, and I'll go back to that in the second round. I'd like to yield to Ms. Bass.